Teenager reveals family secret in court. Everyone was shocked. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension, as if everyone inside had forgotten how to breathe. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of restless bodies, murmurs flitting like sparks across a field of dry grass. Then from the witness stand, a trembling voice rose, small at first, but unshakably resolute. "I know what happened to my brother." Emily Peterson's words cut through the silence like a scalpel through skin. The entire room snapped to attention. Every head turned toward the teenage girl, standing alone in the witness box, her hands clutching its edges so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her voice quivered, but there was fire behind it, a fury held back for far too long. Gasps rippled across the room. One juror's pen slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The stenographer stopped typing mid-word. At the defense table, Robert Peterson, her father, the man once praised as a legal lion, now facing allegations of corruption, rose so quickly his chair screeched backward. "Emily, no! Don't say another word!" he barked, his voice desperate and cracking with panic. But Emily didn't flinch. She took a breath, her chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow pulses. Her eyes glistened, but did not break. "I can't stay silent anymore," she continued, louder now, firmer. "Everyone deserves to know the truth." The judge slammed her gavel against the wood, trying to regain control. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." But control had already slipped away. Emily's mother sat frozen, her face pale as paper, one trembling hand covering her mouth. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, silent and endless, as though her body had forgotten how to do anything but weep. Emily turned slowly to face the jury. "Jason didn't run away," she said, voice raw with grief and fury. "He didn't disappear. He was forced to leave. And the person responsible." She paused, the words catching in her throat like shards of glass. The room leaned in. You could hear the buzz of the overhead lights, the tap-tap of reporters scribbling notes with renewed frenzy. Emily pointed toward the defense table, directly at her father. "The person responsible is sitting right there." The courtroom exploded. Reporters shot up from their seats, cameras flashing. Lawyers on both sides began shouting over each other. The gallery broke into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and stunned outrage. Even the bailiffs hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness the spectacle unfolding before them. But Emily stood as still as stone. She turned her head, almost involuntarily, toward the rear of the courtroom. And that's when it happened. She froze. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her wide, tear-glazed eyes locked onto something or someone at the very back of the room. For a moment, it was as if time itself forgot to move. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she gasped, "Jason?" There, standing in the shadows near the double doors, was a figure no one had expected to see ever again. Jason Peterson, 2 years missing, presumed dead, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken but unmistakably his. He took one cautious step forward, and the room erupted once more into chaos. A woman fainted in the gallery. A reporter screamed. One of the jurors broke down in tears. Robert Peterson, father, lawyer, now accused, stared at the boy as though he'd seen a ghost. His face went sheet white, mouth agape. "No, this can't be." The judge's gavel hammered again and again, her voice strained and barely audible over the tidal wave of panic. "Order! Order in the court!" But there was no order. Jason stood tall, though he looked as if a strong wind might knock him over. His eyes scanned the room until they met Emily's. Something passed between them then, something deep and wordless. Recognition. Relief. Emily's chest heaved as she stared at her brother, alive and standing. Proof that she hadn't been crazy, hadn't been paranoid, hadn't imagined the cold weight of lies that had wrapped themselves around her family like chains. 2 years before the courtroom chaos, before the gasps and gavel strikes, before Jason's reappearance shattered the carefully constructed facade of their family, Emily's life was, by all accounts, normal. Not perfect, but full of warmth, laughter, and the comforting rhythm of suburban predictability. Back then, Jason wasn't a ghost in her memory. He was her big brother, her protector, her secret keeper, the one person who could always make her laugh, even on her worst days. Jason was everything a big brother should be, charming without arrogance, sharp-witted, always teasing her with a grin that made it impossible to stay mad. He helped her with math, snuck her extra dessert when their mom wasn't looking, and stayed up late watching sci-fi movies with her, even when he had practice at 6 the next morning. Their bond wasn't just close, it was unbreakable. At least that's what Emily had believed. And their family? The outside world saw them as picture perfect. Robert Peterson, a respected attorney with a courtroom win streak that made headlines. Their mother, graceful and elegant, always the one hosting PTA brunches and charity fundraisers with a smile. Emily often thought they were like something out of a magazine, but now she knew better. The truth had been hiding in the shadows all along, and the cracks had started to form on one seemingly ordinary Tuesday. That was the day everything changed. It had started out like any other day. Emily was in 7th grade, racing through algebra homework, counting the minutes until dinner. The smell of garlic bread filled the house. Their mom was humming softly in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. Jason had been upstairs getting ready for soccer practice. He was whistling, some dumb pop song Emily hated, and when she yelled at him to change it, he just laughed and shouted back that her taste in music was embarrassingly tragic. She didn't know that would be the last time she'd ever hear his laugh in that house. Later that evening, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a tension in the air that didn't belong. Emily had gone to her room to grab a book when she heard raised voices downstairs, sharp, clipped words slicing through the silence. She paused on the staircase, heart thumping. It was her father and Jason. "Do you have any idea what's at stake?" Robert's voice was low but vicious. "You think this is some game?" Jason didn't back down. "I'm not part of whatever this is. I'm not going to lie for you." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of something heavy, maybe a fist, hitting a table. "You don't know what you're talking about," Robert snapped. "You've always been naive." "And you've always been a coward," Jason shot back, voice cracking with fury. "You just hide it behind suits and courtroom theatrics." Emily gripped the banister, her blood running cold. She had never heard Jason talk to their father like that. No one had. In their house, Robert's word was final. Arguments weren't allowed, only obedience. She backed away slowly, afraid she'd be caught listening, and retreated to her room. Her fingers trembled as she opened her textbook, the numbers swimming before her eyes. That was the moment she realized something was wrong, terribly wrong, but she never imagined how far it would go. Later that night, Jason didn't come downstairs for dinner. When their mom asked about him, Robert just said, he went out. He needed to cool off. But something about the way he said it, too casually, too dismissively, made Emily's skin crawl. She waited up that night, staring at the clock. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. Still no Jason. She texted him. Called. No response. She crept into his room and found his soccer gear gone, but his phone still sitting on the nightstand. That alone was enough to make her panic. Jason never went anywhere without his phone. Never. The next morning, their mother called the police. The report was filed. Search parties were organized. Flyers were printed, posted on streetlights and school bulletin boards. Volunteers combed the woods near their neighborhood. Every news station in the county ran Jason's photo. But as the days dragged into weeks, and the weeks into months, the momentum faded. Leads went cold. Tips led nowhere. The police began to shift their narrative. No signs of foul play, they said. He probably ran away. That was the official story. The case was quietly closed. Just another teenager who left home, they said. Just another runaway. But Emily knew better. She remembered that argument. She remembered the fear in Jason's voice. She remembered the way her father avoided talking about it, how he buried himself in work, refused to answer questions, shut down every conversation with a cold stare and a colder silence. The house changed. No longer felt like home. Her mother became a ghost, wandering from room to room, sobbing into Jason's old clothes. Her father became even more distant, more controlling. And Emily was left alone in a house full of unanswered questions, screaming truths that no one wanted to hear. She begged the police to reopen the case, showed them the phone, told them Jason would never have left her, never without a word. But they didn't listen. They labeled her grief as denial, her suspicions as childish imagination. They told her to move on. But how do you move on when the last thing your brother ever said to you was a joke about your music taste? How do you move on when you know in your bones he didn't leave you? He was taken? Emily carried that silence for 2 years. 2 years of aching, sleepless nights. 2 years of pretending everything was fine while her world rotted underneath. She didn't forget. She didn't let go. She didn't forgive, because the truth hadn't disappeared with Jason. It had been hiding in plain sight, in that house, in that courtroom, behind the eyes of the man who told the world he was just a father mourning his son. And just when the courtroom could take no more, when tension had reached its breaking point and Emily's final words hung heavy in the air, Jason stepped forward. The moment Jason stepped forward and spoke, the courtroom collectively forgot how to breathe. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rough, barely louder than a whisper, but clear as a gunshot in a silent room. "I'd like to be sworn in as a witness." A stunned silence fell across the courtroom like a dropped curtain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the explosion came. Gasps, shouts, a flurry of motion from attorneys scrambling to their feet. The stenographer dropped her notepad. The bailiffs reached instinctively for their belts, unsure whether this was a legal proceeding or the start of something far more dangerous. Reporters leapt to their feet, pens flying, cameras clicking. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Emily sat frozen in the witness stand, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the chaos. Jason, her brother presumed dead, now standing alive and real, was asking to testify. Not as a victim, not as a son, but as a witness. A witness to what? Her father, Robert Peterson, turned to Jason with a look of raw horror etched into his face. For the first time, the mask of composure cracked, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide. "Jason," he rasped, "don't." But Jason didn't look at him. He stared at the judge, posture rigid, eyes blazing not with fear, but with purpose. "I have information," he continued, louder now, "about what happened the night I disappeared, about what happened in that house." The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Are you saying you're the Jason Peterson listed in this court's records as missing for nearly 2 years? "Yes, Your Honor," Jason answered. "That's me." A tremor ran through the room like a lightning bolt. Emily's mother let out a strangled sob. Jurors sat with mouths open, stunned and confused, but none more shaken than Robert, whose fingers gripped the edge of the defense table like he needed it to stay upright. "This is highly irregular," his defense attorney cried. "This young man hasn't been vetted, hasn't been scheduled. He's a missing person, not a ghost." The judge cut in coldly. "Bailiff, swear him in." Emily watched Jason raise his hand, and for a moment, everything else faded. The lies, the silence, the pain. They all led to this. Her brother was back, and he was about to burn down every lie their father had ever told. But as Jason took the stand, Emily saw it. The way his hands trembled ever so slightly. The way his eyes flickered toward the defense table. The weight he carried wasn't just about surviving. It was about speaking a truth so heavy it could destroy everything. The courtroom fell silent as Jason adjusted the microphone. The weight of 2 years pressing down on every breath he took. His eyes scanned the room, past the stunned jury, past the reporters leaning forward with pens suspended midair, past the spectators who clung to every twitch of his face, and landed squarely on his father. "I didn't disappear," Jason began, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "I was forced to leave." A collective shiver swept through the room. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding as Jason inhaled slowly, as if each memory he was about to reveal burned on its way out. "It was 2 years ago," Jason continued, his gaze distant. "The night before I vanished, I'd just come back from practice. Emily had been bugging me to help with her algebra. I told her I would, after dinner." A faint, heartbroken smile touched his lips for half a second, before fading. "That night I heard something. Something I wasn't supposed to. He leaned forward, every word slicing through the silence like a scalpel. My father was on the phone, in his office. The door was cracked open. At first, I didn't care. I thought it was just another work call. But then, he closed his eyes, reliving the moment. He said, "If the police find out, it's over. You promised this would be clean." And then he said, "Make sure the paper trail disappears. No loose ends, especially not him." Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought he was talking about a client, until he said my name. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order!" Jason didn't flinch. I stepped back, but I must have made a noise. The floor creaked, and then he saw me. His eyes flickered toward Robert Peterson, who now sat pale and motionless at the defense table. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He hung up the phone, walked over, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What exactly did you hear, Jason?" Jason's hands clenched on the wooden edge of the witness box. I told him nothing, lied straight to his face, but he didn't believe me. He swallowed hard, the next words barely escaping his throat. He grabbed my arm, said we were going for a drive. Emily felt her blood run cold. Jason's voice shook, but his stare never left the judge. He took me out of the house. I didn't know where we were going. I kept asking, but he wouldn't answer. Just drove, for over an hour, into the woods. The jury leaned in. Everyone did. When we finally stopped, he pulled me out of the car, told me to listen carefully. He said if I ever told anyone what I'd heard, he would make sure I disappeared for real. But not before something happened to Emily. Emily's breath caught in her throat. He said it like he'd rehearsed it. Calm, cold. He said, "If you care about your sister, you'll leave. You'll disappear. You'll stay gone." Jason's voice cracked. He told me that disappearing was the only way to protect my family. He paused, the silence in the room now deafening. So I ran. He looked directly at Emily now. Not because I was scared for myself, but because I believed him. I believed he'd hurt you. A tear slid down her cheek. I didn't know where to go. I had no money, no phone, no plan. I just vanished, slept in abandoned buildings, found shelters where no one asked questions, changed my name, changed everything. Jason exhaled sharply. Every night I wanted to come back, but I couldn't. Not until I was sure he couldn't hurt you. The judge leaned forward. What changed? Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. He held it up for all to see. I found this. A ledger, buried in a storage unit registered under a fake name, but with my father's handwriting all over it. It listed names, payments, locations, all tied to some kind of trafficking operation. Whispers exploded in the room. Jason continued, louder now. This wasn't just about me. He was involved in something bigger, and I realized keeping quiet wasn't protecting my family. It was enabling a monster. He turned back to his father, eyes ablaze. I came back because someone had to stop you, because silence doesn't protect the innocent. It protects the guilty. Robert Peterson's face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with something Emily had never seen before. Rage laced with fear. The judge stared hard at Jason. Are you saying your father threatened your life and your sister's because you overheard a conversation related to criminal activity? Yes, Your Honor, Jason said, and I have the evidence. The courtroom had never been louder. Gasps collided with shouts, whispers turned to roars. Every person in that room had the same expression, disbelief wrapped in panic. But in the center of the storm, Jason stood still, unflinching, resolute. His hand was extended, holding a folded sheet of paper that could detonate everything his father had built. This, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, is proof. Names, dates, locations, every illegal transaction, and my father is at the center of it. The judge narrowed her eyes, motioning for the bailiff to collect the document. The moment it changed hands, the room seemed to tilt. Robert Peterson, once a towering symbol of legal prestige, suddenly looked small, cornered. His face twitched, but he said nothing, not a word. The judge flipped through the paper slowly. With each turn, her jaw stiffened. This court, she finally declared, her voice cold and commanding, has reason to believe that there may be substantial criminal activity linked to the defendant, Robert Peterson. Effective immediately, the trial is suspended pending further investigation. Silence, no one dared move. Even the air in the room felt frozen, afraid of what would come next. We will begin a full-scale inquiry into the allegations and materials presented, the judge continued. Until then, Mr. Peterson is not to leave the jurisdiction. The family will be placed under police supervision until further notice. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed. The sound reverberated like thunder. And then all hell broke loose. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. Attorneys scrambled to regain control of a situation that had long since slipped through their fingers. Emily stood frozen on the witness stand, her heart pounding. Her father, her once untouchable, unbreakable father, looked directly at Jason. His eyes were pure venom. Jason stared back, unshaken. Two bailiffs approached the Peterson family. "You'll be escorted home," one said curtly. "We're assigning officers to monitor the property. You're not under arrest yet, but don't make us regret this." Robert said nothing. He simply straightened his tie, trying to preserve whatever scraps of dignity he had left. But his hands were trembling. Outside the courthouse steps were a battlefield of flashing lights and screaming headlines. "Jason, is it true your father threatened you? Mrs. Peterson, did you know about the transactions? Emily, how does it feel knowing your brother was alive all this time?" Jason wrapped a protective arm around Emily as they pushed through the crowd. Their mother followed behind, dazed and pale, shielding her face from the frenzy. And their father walked ahead, shoulders squared, gaze blank. The car ride home was silent. Not just awkward, unnaturally, violently silent. The kind that wrapped around your throat and dared you to speak. At one point, Emily opened her mouth, but said nothing. What could she say? Their family had been shattered by lies. Their home was no longer safe, and the man they once called Dad had become a stranger, and maybe something far worse. The car finally pulled up in front of their once peaceful suburban house. A police cruiser was already parked across the street. An officer stepped out, nodded toward them, and said, "We'll be rotating surveillance shifts. You'll be safe. Hopefully." No one replied. The front door creaked open. The house welcomed them not with warmth, but with shadows. The silence inside was louder than the chaos they'd just left behind. Their mother collapsed onto the living room couch, head in her hands. Emily lingered in the foyer, staring at the family portrait still hanging on the wall, the smiling faces of 4 people who no longer existed. Jason stood in the center of the room, backpack still slung over his shoulder. He hadn't let go of the truth, not for a second. He turned to Emily. "We're not done." She looked at him, hollow-eyed. "What do you mean?" "The paper I gave the judge. It was just one copy, 1 page." Her heart skipped. "You have more?" Jason nodded. "But I didn't include everything. Not yet. I wanted to see how he'd react." They both turned toward the hallway. The study at the end of it loomed like a locked vault. "Then we go in," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm. Jason gave her a grim smile. "Tonight." Just then, their father entered the room. His footsteps were deliberate, precise. His face was calm. Too calm. "You two," he said, his tone clipped and cold. "Stay out of my office. I won't warn you again." Emily flinched. Jason didn't. He stared at Robert with eyes that had seen too much to be afraid anymore. "We're not your pawns anymore," Jason said. Father narrowed his eyes, jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're doing. You're tampering with something bigger than you understand." Jason's voice didn't waver. "Then help us understand. Unless you're scared." For a second, Robert said nothing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the hallway like a man trying to outrun a storm. Emily turned to Jason. "What if he destroys everything before we can find it?" Jason's reply was ice cold. "Then we better move fast." And in that moment, they knew. This wasn't just about finding more evidence. It was about survival, because the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth became. Title: Into the Lion's Den. The house had never felt more like a trap. It was nearly midnight. The lights were off. the silence unnatural. Emily stood barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, staring down the dim hallway that led to her father's office. The same hallway that used to feel safe when she tiptoed to the kitchen for late-night snacks. Now every creak, every shadow, every breath felt like it could give them away. Jason stepped up beside her, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. "He's asleep. Now's the time." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. "Let's end this." They moved like ghosts, gliding silently toward the door that had always been off limits. Robert Peterson's study, the nerve center of his secrets. Emily had never dared enter it without permission. Even as a child, she'd known instinctively. What lay behind that door wasn't meant for her. Jason picked the lock with practiced hands. A soft click. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room frozen in sterile perfection. Leather chairs, dark mahogany shelves, files aligned with surgical precision. The air smelled like expensive cologne and something colder. Something hidden. "Close the door," Jason whispered. Emily obeyed, shutting them into darkness. Then Jason flicked on a small flashlight. Its beam cut across the room like a scalpel. They began searching. Jason went straight to the filing cabinet, flipping through labeled folders with lightning speed. Case reviews, client records, donations. But something didn't add up. None of these files explained why their father had threatened his own son into disappearing. Emily moved toward the desk. She checked the drawers, legal pads, pens, neatly folded documents. All useless. Then her fingers grazed something unusual underneath the desk. Tape. Her breath caught. She dropped to her knees and peeled away the edge of a thick envelope duct taped beneath the wood. It was heavy, sealed, and marked with a strange symbol, an angular circle with a bar slashed through the middle. Jason saw it and froze. "That's the same symbol from the ledger, the same one I saw in the storage unit." Emily didn't respond. She ripped open the envelope with shaking hands and dumped the contents onto the desk. Silence, until Jason whispered, "Holy hell!" Inside were pages and pages of handwritten records, rows of coded shipments, dates, locations, payments. It wasn't legal documentation. It was inventory. At the top of one page, scrawled in bold ink, "Willow Creek shipment, unmarked crates, no inspection required." Emily's voice was a whisper of horror. "No inspection? That means they're bypassing customs. These aren't just missed records. They're smuggling something." Jason turned to another page. A list of recipients, all initials and bank account numbers. Offshore accounts, massive wire transfers. "This isn't petty crime," he muttered. "This is organized and deep." Then Emily found the photograph. She held it up to the light, and her stomach twisted into a knot. Her father was standing in a dark warehouse, shaking hands with a man in a black suit. The man's face was partially shadowed, but his posture radiated control, his smile cold and deliberate. Behind them were crates, dozens of them, all unmarked, stamped only with the same symbol on the envelope. "This is the man," Jason said grimly. "The one I saw in court. He was sitting in the back, just watching. He's not a lawyer. He's something else." Emily stared at the photo, bile rising in her throat. Why would Dad be in a warehouse with someone like this? He's supposed to be a lawyer, not... Jason finished the thought for her. A trafficker. They both looked at the documents again. Some of the crates were labeled with acronyms. PH, TQ93, CMLIVE. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Jason, these don't look like drug codes." Jason nodded slowly. "I know. Some of them are weight entries, but others..." He stopped. His voice changed. "Live. Emily, what if these aren't just drugs? What if some of the shipments are people?" Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "No, no way." Jason's voice was steel. "If Dad's involved in this, smuggling people, kids maybe, it's beyond corruption. It's monstrous." They stood frozen, surrounded by shadows and damning evidence. Emily broke the silence. "We have to get this out. Now." Jason gathered the pages, careful not to crumple a single sheet. "We scan it. Make copies. Hide one. Deliver the rest to Detective Harris. Then, voices, distant, muffled. The front door opened. Jason's eyes widened. He's back. Emily's heart shot into her throat. Already? Jason grabbed the envelope. We've got 30 seconds. They shoved the evidence back inside, Emily cramming the photograph into her hoodie pocket. Jason zipped the folder into his backpack and raced to turn off the flashlight. The office door creaked open just as footsteps hit the bottom stair. Jason whispered, "Lights off. Move." They ducked out the side hallway and slipped into the dark laundry room just as Robert's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. He paused outside the office door, hand resting on the knob. Emily held her breath so long her lungs burned. Then, the doorknob clicked. Robert stepped inside. Jason leaned in, whispered, "If he finds the envelope missing..." Emily clenched her fists. "We'll never make it out." Inside the study, they heard drawers opening, a chair sliding, papers shifting. Jason pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the camera, and quickly snapped a blurry picture of the photo Emily had pocketed. Just in case, a floorboard creaked. Robert stepped back into the hallway. Jason mouthed, "Go." They moved fast and quiet, through the laundry room door to the garage. The metal doorknob was cold, but freedom was colder. They slipped into the night just as the headlights of the second police cruiser swept across the lawn. Emily looked back at the house that once held birthday parties, game nights, and Christmas mornings. Now it held evidence of something unforgivable. She turned to Jason. "What if we can't stop him?" Jason's voice was quiet, but unbreakable. "Then we burn it all down trying. The fight for justice is just beginning." More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The night was too quiet, not peaceful, ominous. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the glow from her phone barely illuminating her face. Down the hall, the house slept, or at least it pretended to. Every shadow on the wall felt heavier than usual. Every creak of the wooden floors beneath her feet made her freeze. Something was wrong, deeply, horribly wrong. And then she heard it, a sharp clatter downstairs, metal against tile. Not accidental, not the wind. She bolted upright. Seconds later, her bedroom door swung open and Jason stood there, wide-eyed, barefoot, clutching the flashlight they'd used earlier. "You heard that?" he whispered. Emily nodded. "Someone's in the house." They moved silently, avoiding every known squeaky floorboard as they crept to the top of the stairs. From their vantage point, they could just make out a shadow moving through their father's study. Someone was inside the office. Jason squinted. "He's not Dad." Emily's breath hitched. The man was tall, wearing dark clothes, face obscured by a black cap. But what caught her eye wasn't the man. It was what he held. A folder, thick, sealed, and unmistakably marked with the same strange angular circle symbol they'd found on the hidden documents in the study. The man moved quickly, searching, flipping through drawers, scanning the room like he knew exactly what he was looking for. When he opened the cabinet beneath the bookshelf, he found something, and smiled. Jason grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her backward into the shadows of the hallway. "He's taking files. That symbol, he's part of it." "Should we call the cops?" Emily whispered. Jason shook his head. "No time. We need to follow him." They waited. The man moved with military precision, grabbing only 2 more folders before closing the cabinet, slipping the documents into his backpack, and making his way out through the back door without a sound. The siblings followed. Barefoot on cold pavement, adrenaline surging through their veins, Emily and Jason trailed the intruder from a distance. He moved quickly down the street, then disappeared into a black SUV parked under a streetlight. The engine purred to life, the headlights stayed off, and the car pulled away into the night. Jason pointed to their bicycles stashed by the garage. "Let's go." Emily hesitated only a second before nodding. They chased the vehicle from the shadows, keeping just enough distance not to be seen. The SUV turned out of their neighborhood and onto the highway. 10 minutes later, it pulled onto an isolated gravel road leading into the industrial outskirts of town. Willow Creek Storage. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and silence, ominous, like the breath held before a storm. Jason's flashlight beam quivered slightly as he swept it across the rows of unmarked shipping containers. Each one looked identical. Cold steel, padlocked, anonymous. But there was one near the back, half hidden in shadow, with the strange angular circle symbol stamped on the side. "That's it," he whispered. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Do it fast." Jason crouched, pulling a rusted crowbar from his backpack. He wedged it beneath the lock and, with a low grunt, popped it free. The metal thudded to the concrete floor like a warning shot. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous space. They both froze. No sound. Jason swung the door wide. His flashlight pierced the darkness, and both of them gasped. Inside were stacks of bundled cash. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Shrink-wrapped, piled high, pressed like bricks. And next to the money, sealed plastic bags. Dozens of them, each filled with a fine white powder. Emily's voice cracked. "Is that?" "Cocaine," Jason said grimly. "Pure, and a lot of it." Emily stumbled back, hands trembling. "We were right. This isn't just fraud. It's a trafficking ring. This is huge." Jason nodded, eyes locked on the contents of the crate, and our dad's at the center of it. Suddenly, clang! A metal door slammed shut at the far end of the warehouse. Jason and Emily spun around. Out of the shadows emerged a tall figure in a sleek black suit, his face half lit by the moonlight filtering through a broken skylight. Behind him, two men flanked his sides, both broad, muscular, and unmistakably armed. "Well, well," the man in the suit said, his voice smooth and venomous. "Peterson kids, always sticking your noses where they don't belong." Jason stepped protectively in front of Emily, his jaw clenched. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. "Call me Mr. Black. Your father and I go way back. He used to be very good at following orders. Pity his kids aren't as obedient." Emily's breath hitched. "You were in the photo, in the warehouse." Mr. Black's eyes glittered with menace. "Very observant. And now you've seen too much." He raised a hand. The two men advanced. Jason grabbed Emily's arm. "Run!" They bolted between rows of containers, boots pounding on concrete. Shouts erupted behind them. Commands barked in clipped, cold tones. Footsteps thundered after them. Emily nearly tripped over a coil of wire, but Jason caught her, yanking her upright. "Left!" They veered around a container and burst through a service door into the open night. The lot was massive, filled with shadows and moonlight, crates and silence. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A siren wailed far off. Too far. "Over there!" one of the men shouted. A shot rang out. The bullet hit a metal container just inches from Emily's head. She screamed and ducked. Jason turned, adrenaline surging. "Keep moving!" They raced toward the far fence, lungs burning, legs aching. Jason spotted a low stack of pallets leading to the chain-link fence. "Climb!" he shouted. Emily scrambled up first. Behind her, Mr. Black's men closed in. Fast. Jason shoved the pallets with all his strength, toppling them behind him to slow the pursuit. Emily reached the top and threw herself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. Jason wasn't so lucky. One of the men lunged and grabbed his ankle mid-climb, yanking him down. Jason slammed onto the pavement, the wind knocked out of him. "Jason!" Emily screamed, turning back. The man pulled a knife from his belt. Jason rolled just as the blade slashed the ground beside his head. He kicked upward, catching the man in the jaw, scrambling to his feet. Emily shouted, "Come on, get up!" Jason didn't hesitate. He launched himself at the fence, scaled it in seconds, and tumbled down beside her. Together they ran into the woods beyond the lot, branches slicing their skin, the world around them a blur of black and panic. Behind them, more gunfire, more shouting. Flashlights flickered through the trees. Jason's voice was hoarse. "We can't outrun them forever." Then red and blue lights, sirens, dozens of them. Squad cars peeled into the lot from every direction. Officers poured out with guns drawn. A helicopter floodlight lit up the sky like dawn. "Get down!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. Mr. Black cursed, vanishing into the trees. Jason and Emily stumbled out of the woods, hands raised, breathless and bleeding. Two officers rushed to them. "Are you okay?" one asked, grabbing Emily's shoulders. Jason gasped. "Warehouse, back there. Crates full of drugs, money. They tried to kill us." Emily was trembling. "We have proof. The crates. It's all there." The officer nodded. "You're safe now." But even as those words were spoken, Jason looked back toward the shadows of the trees, where Mr. Black had disappeared. Title: The Confirmation. The air in the police station was ice cold, but Emily couldn't tell if it was the AC or the weight pressing against her chest. Jason sat beside her, his arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the one-way mirror in the interrogation room. Across the glass sat their father, Robert Peterson, once a man she'd looked up to, now just a shadow behind glass, stoic, silent, and for the first time, exposed. Detective Harris entered the observation room. His face was grave, eyes lined with exhaustion and something else, pity. He held a manila folder in his hand, thick, heavy, burdened with truth. "You need to hear this," he said, voice low. Emily turned to him, heart pounding. Jason leaned forward. Harris opened the folder and spread out a series of documents, wire transfers, photographs, inventory lists, and statements from arrested suspects. One photo showed Robert at the warehouse, standing beside the man Jason and Emily had only known as Mr. Black. Another showed shipping crates, filled with cash and drugs, signed off by documents linked directly to Robert's firm. "He's involved," Harris said flatly. "Not just a silent partner. Your father helped build this operation." Emily's stomach dropped. Harris continued. "He used his legal firm to launder money, falsify customs reports, and cover for dozens of illicit shipments, some involving narcotics, others," his voice faltered slightly, "others involving people." Emily's breath caught. "Human trafficking?" Jason slammed his fist into the table, the sound sharp and hollow. "We knew it. We knew he wasn't just protecting his name. He was protecting a criminal empire." Harris nodded. "We've linked him to at least 7 major operations across 3 states. The documents you two helped uncover, those ledger entries, the photo, the warehouse tip-off, were the final nail." Emily stared at the glass. On the other side, her father sat perfectly still, hands folded, like nothing could touch him. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would he do this? He had everything." Harris sighed. "Power isn't always about need. Sometimes it's about control. Your father wasn't coerced, he orchestrated much of it. And when Jason overheard something he wasn't supposed to, your dad made him disappear, just like he would any loose end." Jason's voice was cold. "He threatened to hurt Emily if I ever came back." Harris looked at them both, somber. "I believe you, and now so will the courts." Outside the room, the world carried on. But for Emily, time had stopped. The truth was out. Her father, the man who once kissed her goodnight and promised to protect her, had been the architect of their nightmares. And now there would be no more lies, only justice. The Peterson house had never been so quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it chokes. Rain tapped steadily against the windows as Emily sat curled on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the front door. Jason stood near the stairs, body tense, heart pounding. He'd seen that look in their father's eyes earlier in court. Robert wasn't finished, not yet. The door swung open. Robert Peterson stepped inside, soaked from the storm, his trench coat hanging off his shoulders. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between desperation and resolve. He didn't look at his children. His eyes scanned the house, then locked onto the hallway leading to his office. "Where is it?" he muttered under his breath. Jason stepped forward. "Don't bother." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Move!" "No," Jason said, his voice rising. "You're not destroying any more truth." Robert's voice dropped into something colder. "You don't know what you're doing?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Jason snapped. "I'm stopping you." Emily rose behind them. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "Dad, please. Don't do this." Robert ignored her. He pushed past Jason, heading for the office. Jason grabbed his arm, and for a second, father and son locked eyes. So much was unsaid. Anger, betrayal, fear. Then from the darkness behind them, click, a familiar sound, a weapon being readied. They froze. Out of the hallway stepped Mr. Black, dressed in the same tailored black suit, his face gleaming with satisfaction. His gloved hands held a silenced pistol at his side. "Touching family moment," he drawled. "Really brings a tear to the eye." Jason shoved Emily behind him. Robert turned to face the man, his face pale. "You said you wouldn't come here. And you said you'd handle it," Mr. Black replied. "But instead, your children are playing hero. That ledger should have been ashes by now." Emily's blood turned to ice. "He knows." Jason forced himself to speak. "You're not getting it." Mr. Black's smirk turned razor sharp. "I don't need to. I just need to make sure you never use it." He gestured, and two more men stepped into view, armed, faceless, efficient. One moved toward the study, the other toward the stairs. Jason's brain raced. They needed a distraction. He glanced at Emily, then gave the smallest of nods. She understood instantly. Jason turned back to Mr. Black and stepped forward, arms spread, drawing every eye in the room. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his voice rising. "You always underestimate people, especially kids." "Is that so?" Mr. Black said, amused. "You're so confident," Jason went on. "So sure you've already won." While he spoke, Emily crept backward, slipping into the hallway. Her heart pounded with every step. She ducked into the small side room they'd used before and dropped to her knees. The floorboard, they'd pried it loose yesterday. She pulled it open with shaking hands, reached into her jacket, and pulled out the black leather notebook, thick with evidence, names, dates, wire transfers. The kind of book that could shatter empires. She placed it beneath the floor and slid the board back just as footsteps echoed nearby. Robert stood in the center of the living room, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. Across from him, Mr. Black's gun was pointed directly at his son. Behind them, the other two men spread out, their every move precise, predatory. "You had one job, Robert," Mr. Black said coldly. "Clean up the mess, burn the evidence. But instead, you're here playing house with your two biggest liabilities." Jason was bleeding from his temple, but his eyes were locked on his father. "Tell them where it is, Dad," he challenged. "Give them the ledger. Go ahead. Finish what you started." Emily stood frozen near the stairs, her back against the wall, heart pounding like a war drum. She'd hidden the ledger. She wasn't sure how much time they had left. Robert didn't answer. His eyes flicked between Jason, Emily, and Mr. Black. The weight of years hung over his frame. All the deals made in shadows. All the times he chose silence over truth. All the nights he convinced himself it was for the good of the family. But that lie was crumbling now, right in front of him. Mr. Black stepped closer. "You going to stand there and watch your son die, Robert?" Robert took a deep breath, and then he stepped between Jason and the gun. "Enough," he said, voice low but thunderous. "They're not part of this anymore. You want someone to blame? Blame me." Mr. Black didn't lower the gun. "You're making a mistake." "No," Robert said, slowly raising his hands. "I've made plenty of those already. This is the only thing I've done right in years." Jason blinked, stunned. "Dad?" Robert didn't look back. "Get your sister and run. Don't argue, just go." Mr. Black's patience snapped. "Move, Robert." "No," Robert replied. "Not this time." And then, chaos. One of the thugs lunged toward Emily. Jason intercepted him, tackling the man with a primal yell. They crashed into the dining table, splintering wood and glass in every direction. Mr. Black aimed his gun at Emily, but Robert moved first. He tackled Mr. Black with the desperation of a father reclaiming his soul. The gun went off with a deafening crack, but the bullet buried itself harmlessly into the ceiling. They hit the floor hard, wrestling, struggling. Robert shouted back, "Go!" Jason grabbed Emily's wrist, dragging her toward the hallway. "I'm not leaving him," Emily cried, tears blurring her vision. "We don't have a choice," Jason shouted. Sirens screamed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Back in the living room, Robert and Mr. Black fought like ghosts in the dark, two men with nothing left to lose. Robert took a brutal punch to the ribs but held on, slamming Mr. Black into the wall, buying 1 second, then another. Jason shoved the back door open, pulling Emily into the yard. Behind them, they heard Robert's final yell. "Tell them everything!" Then, gunfire. A single, sharp blast. The world stopped for a breath. And then the police stormed in. Officers flooded the property. Shouts, lights, orders, flashing red and blue, painting the chaos in color. Emily collapsed into Jason's arms, sobbing. Inside, Robert Peterson lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. But Mr. Black was in cuffs, alive, furious, and silent. Their father had paid the price, but he had bought them freedom, not with lies, but with sacrifice. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. The call came just after dawn. Detective Harris's voice crackled through the line, breathless and electric. "We got him! We got Reedman!" Emily froze in the kitchen, coffee mug trembling in her hand. Jason was across the room, eyes widening as she mouthed the words. It felt surreal, like the monster that had haunted their every nightmare had finally been cornered. The man who orchestrated an empire of drugs, laundered cash, inhuman lives from the shadows had finally been dragged into the light. Interpol, acting on the ledger Robert Peterson had hidden beneath the floorboards, had tracked Reedman to a luxury compound nestled deep in the Cayman Islands. The raid was brutal and swift. Armed agents swarmed the estate under cover of darkness, kicking down reinforced doors and crashing through bulletproof glass. There was no cinematic standoff, no final speech from a villain. Just a middle-aged man in silk pajamas, stunned as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But it wasn't the arrest alone that shattered the entire operation. It was the ledger. Inside Reedman's office, buried beneath loose floorboards and hidden by a false wall, agents found another black-bound notebook, nearly identical to the one Emily and Jason had recovered. It was a map of corruption, names, dates, payment trails, offshore accounts, shipping manifests, encrypted phone numbers. Some of the pages were smeared with what looked like wine, others carefully protected in plastic sleeves. But the message was clear. This wasn't a gang. It was a syndicate, global, systemic, meticulously protected. Within 48 hours, law enforcement agencies across multiple countries coordinated simultaneous raids. Warehouses were stormed, accounts frozen, dozens of high-profile officials, including 2 judges, a customs director, and a sitting congressman, were arrested before breakfast. Media outlets exploded with breaking headlines. The syndicate that once felt untouchable was collapsing in real time. Emily and Jason sat glued to the television as live footage streamed from various cities, crates of cocaine stacked like bricks in a Miami port, trafficked women escorted to safety in Lisbon, European bank executives frog-marched into armored vans. It was a spectacle of long overdue justice. And yet, beneath the headlines, Emily's chest was tight. The cost of this justice had been everything. Her innocence, Jason's freedom, their family. At the heart of every broadcast was one name, Peterson, sometimes spoken with disgust, sometimes awe, sometimes both. Robert Peterson, the once respected attorney, father of 2, architect of his own downfall. His ledger had been the match that lit a fire under a global empire. And though his crimes were undeniable, his final act of redemption, choosing to shield his children and bring the truth to light, reverberated through the system like an aftershock. Still, the storm was far from over. Reporters swarmed their neighborhood. The police had stationed 2 officers outside the house just to keep photographers at bay. Journalists shouted questions from across the street. "Emily, do you forgive your father? Jason, is it true you were in hiding for 2 years? How do you feel knowing your father helped bring down one of the largest smuggling rings in U.S. history?" They didn't answer. They couldn't. There were no words to explain the war they had lived through. The betrayals, the lies, the nights spent wondering if they'd live to see the morning. Their father wasn't a hero, but in the end, he wasn't just a villain either. The FBI held a press conference, the director himself announcing the syndicate had been officially classified as dismantled. Applause echoed through the room when the arrest of Reedman was confirmed. Names of conspirators filled the screen behind the podium. Some Emily recognized from business dinners and family events, smiling men in suits who'd once patted her head and called her bright-eyed. Now they were fugitives, their photos stamped with red banners that read, "Wanted." The weight of it all crashed down like a wave. Jason slumped onto the couch beside her, exhaling slowly. "It's over," he whispered. "It's really over." Emily nodded, eyes glassy. "We survived it." But even as she spoke the words, she knew survival was just the beginning. The handcuffs clinked as they locked around Robert Peterson's wrists. It was a quiet sound, almost gentle. But for Emily and Jason, it thundered through the courtroom like a death knell. He didn't resist. No outburst, no pleas. Just a man in a wrinkled suit lowering his head as the judge read out the sentence. 5 years in federal custody, reduced from 20 in light of his cooperation, and the fact that he had risked his life to protect his children in the final hour. Justice tempered by redemption. But for Emily, it still felt like grief. She didn't cry when they took him away. Not in front of the press, not in front of the agents who'd watched her home become a war zone. But when she got back to that house, the same house where the lies began, where the floorboards still remembered the sound of her father's footsteps, she curled up on the stairs and broke. Jason sat beside her, silent, his fists clenched on his knees. No words, just the unbearable weight of absence. Living without him was like learning to breathe differently. Some mornings, she still heard his voice calling for coffee. Some nights, she still expected to hear his car in the driveway. But every echo reminded her that the man who raised them had lived 2 lives, and the second had nearly destroyed the first. Still, they didn't crumble. Jason, once angry and reckless, began volunteering at a local youth center. He worked with kids who knew too much about pain, kids who reminded him of himself, the version who almost disappeared forever. He didn't talk about what he'd been through, but he listened. And when they trusted him enough to share their stories, he guided them, gently, fiercely, away from the edge he had once teetered on. Emily poured her rage and grief into writing. She started with a blog post, raw and unfiltered. "My father was a criminal, and he saved my life." The story spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, comments from strangers who whispered their own truths. She kept writing about corruption, betrayal, justice, and what it means to love someone who has done unforgivable things. She wrote not for sympathy, but as a warning. Secrets don't protect families. They destroy them. But healing was not linear. There were days when the house felt too empty, too loud with silence. Emily would find Jason standing in their father's old office, just staring at the books, the desk, the empty picture frame where their family photo used to be. "Do you think he hated who he became?" Jason once asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't know how to answer. Maybe he did. Maybe he hated that the line between protector and criminal had blurred so far he couldn't see it anymore. But what she did know, what they both knew, was that their father had chosen to stop running. In the end, he had faced the monster he helped build and burned it down from the inside. That mattered. The world, however, wasn't always so forgiving. Headlines followed them for months. Peterson kids speak out. Children of corruption, from victims to voices. Some people applauded them. Others whispered behind their backs. But Emily and Jason kept moving forward, not because it was easy, but because they had survived too much to ever be silent again. On the anniversary of the trial, Emily stood in front of a crowd at a youth summit. Her palms were sweaty. Her heart raced, but her voice was steady. "I used to think justice was a clean, sharp thing, that once the truth came out, everything would be okay. I was wrong. Justice is messy, it's painful, it takes pieces of you before it gives anything back. But it's worth it, because silence rots everything." The audience fell quiet, her words lingering like smoke. That night, she and Jason walked home together under the stars. Their neighborhood felt different now, safer, stronger, like it had been rewritten, like they had rewritten it. Jason nudged her. Think Dad would be proud of us? Emily looked up at the same sky that had watched over them during every lie, every loss, every impossible choice. She smiled just a little. Maybe, she said, but what matters is we're proud of us. The sky was painted in fire, streaks of orange and red melting into the horizon like the final brushstrokes of a long, violent day. Emily sat on the porch steps, her knees hugged to her chest, her notebook resting in her lap. Beside her, Jason leaned back in the old wooden chair, its legs creaking with every gentle sway. They hadn't said much in the last hour. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared, earned. They watched as the sun sank behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The same yard where 2 years ago, Jason had vanished without a trace. The same yard where secrets had fermented like poison beneath their father's footsteps. Now it was just grass and dusk and 2 siblings who had lived through hell and come back standing. Jason exhaled slowly, eyes on the skyline. You remember the night we followed the guy in the black suit to the warehouse? His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The way the air felt, like we were already too deep and there was no way back. Emily nodded, her throat tight. I remember thinking we wouldn't make it out, that we'd be buried in one of those containers, just more names on a cold case board. Jason smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. We should have died that night. But we didn't, Emily said, her voice firmer now. We didn't die. We didn't disappear. We didn't stay silent. The words echoed, lingering between them. Emily glanced down at the notebook on her lap. The cover was black, scuffed, and covered in smudged ink. It wasn't the infamous ledger. It was hers, her own record of truth, her own reckoning. On the front cover, scribbled in bold red ink, were the words, "We didn't stay silent." She opened the notebook, flipping through pages filled with her handwriting, chaotic at first, scribbled in rage and grief, but becoming steadier as the weeks passed. Every lie, every betrayal, every impossible decision, they were all there. The night Jason was forced to flee, the day she took the stand, the moment their father stood between them and the barrel of a gun. Jason leaned over, his eyes scanning the page. You're turning it into a book, he asked. Emily nodded. A memoir, a warning, maybe even a lesson. Jason's brow furrowed. Won't that reopen wounds? Some wounds need to be reopened, Emily said, so they don't get infected, so they don't spread in silence. Jason sat back, the words sinking in. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like the terrified little sister clutching his hand in the dark. She looked like a survivor, a fighter, a truth teller. You've changed, he said quietly. So have you, Emily replied. He grinned. Guess we're not kids anymore. No, she said, her eyes drifting back to the fading sun. We're not. The door behind them creaked open, and their mother stepped out, holding a tray with 2 mugs of hot tea. Her hands still trembled slightly, and the dark circles beneath her eyes hadn't completely faded, but she was healing, in her own time, in her own way. She set the tray down on the railing and kissed them both on the head. I'm proud of you, she said simply, then turned and went back inside. Jason picked up a mug and took a sip, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, he said slowly, I used to think we had to fix everything. Bring back the family we lost, the way it was before Dad, before all of it. Emily stayed quiet, waiting. But now I think maybe we don't need a perfect family, Jason continued. We just need one that's honest, one that doesn't pretend, one that survives. Emily smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. We don't need a perfect family, she echoed, just a real one. Jason nodded. Exactly. We don't need perfect. We just need true. The sky was darker now, stars beginning to blink into view. In the distance, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the driveway before disappearing into the silence of the street. The world outside still turned, still dangerous, still unpredictable. But on this porch, for the first time in a long time, there was peace. Emily looked at her notebook one last time and closed it gently. "I'm going to finish this," she said, "and when I do, I'm going to share it, because someone, somewhere, might be stuck in the kind of silence we used to live in, and they need to know that survival is possible." Jason reached over and gave her hand a light squeeze. "Then let's make sure they hear us." And together, under a sky full of stars and the weight of everything they'd survived, they sat in the quiet, unafraid, unbroken, and ready to begin again.